For 45 straight years, a massive global struggle between two superpowers pretty much ran the entire world. But this wasn't just something happening in far-off places. No, this conflict reached right into the heart of the United States, and it changed everything, from foreign policy all the way down to the fabric of society itself. So let's dive in and see how this incredible struggle left its mark on a nation.
It's a great question, right? Because the name itself, Cold War, makes it sound kind of distant, like there was no real fighting. But as we're about to see, the consequences were anything but cold. Oh no, they were fiery, they were transformative, and you can still feel the heat from them today. To really get a handle on this era, we've got to start by looking at the enormous shadow the Cold War cast over, well, everything. It was the main event, the engine that was driving just about every major decision, both at home and around the globe, for almost half a century. So what are we actually talking about here? At its heart, the Cold War was a battle of ideas, capitalism versus communism. But, and this is the key, both sides had nuclear weapons. So a direct, all-out hot war? Yeah, that was completely off the table. Instead, the fight played out in other ways, through proxy wars where each superpower would back opposite sides in smaller conflicts, through insane arms races, and through some incredibly tense political chess matches. And this list just shows you how wide-ranging the whole thing was. This was not a one-issue conflict. You had the constant existential dread of the nuclear arms race hanging over everyone's heads. But at the same time, you had this intense paranoia at home with the Second Red Scare, this fear of communism that led to blacklists and loyalty oaths that literally ruined people's lives and careers. And all the while, you had these international hotspots, like Cuba, that brought the entire world right to the brink of nuclear war. Okay, so let's track that first major ripple. Let's see how all this ideological tension finally exploded into actual brutal combat. The Korean War was a huge turning point where this theoretical conflict suddenly became very, very real. And here's the thing you have to remember. This was not just another regional war. This was a full-blown proxy war. You had the US and its allies fighting directly against forces that were backed by the Soviet Union and China. The rules that were written here, this idea of intervention, this policy of containment to stop communism from spreading, well, that became the playbook for American foreign policy for generations to come. Now, what's so fascinating about this is how it lays out the immediate diplomatic fallout. Relations with China, they went from bad to worse, becoming totally adversarial. On the flip side, the war cemented Japan's role as a key American ally in Asia. And for Korea, well, a tragic and lasting division that is still a major global flashpoint to this day. So, from one conflict, we move to the next huge ripple, the Vietnam War. But with this one, the story shifts a little because the divisions happening overseas created even deeper, more painful divisions right back here at home. This slide just perfectly captures the central conflict of the era. As billions and billions of dollars were being poured into the war effort, domestic programs, programs meant to fight poverty and inequality, they were being completely starved of cash. And this created this incredible, impossible choice. How can you fight for freedom and ideals halfway across the world while it feels like you're ignoring the challenges in your own backyard? And that question, well, it lit a firestorm. The anti-war movement just exploded into this massive cultural force, challenging the government on a scale that nobody had ever seen before. You combine that with all the urban unrest happening at the same time, and you had a society that honestly felt like it was breaking apart at the seams. That deep polarization started to erode public trust in the government, and that's a consequence we are absolutely still dealing with. And it wasn't just Vietnam, The anxiety of the entire Cold War era, it seeped into every single corner of American life. It created this constant low-grade fever of fear and suspicion that just never went away. I mean, look at this timeline. It just drives home how relentless it all was. There was no time to catch your breath. The country was still recovering from a decade of McCarthyism, when the failed Bay of Pigs invasion shook everyone's confidence. Then, just a year later, the Cuban Missile Crisis had families legitimately believing the world was about to end. And all of this was happening while the protests over Vietnam were tearing the country apart. There was just no escape from the pressure. This quote really just says it all, doesn't it? The Cold War wasn't some abstract game being played by politicians in Washington. No, it was a daily reality. It was something that shaped what people thought about, what they were afraid of, and who they voted for.
It defined an entire generation that grew up under this constant cloud of potential disaster.
So, after all these ripples, these conflicts, and all this nonstop tension, what's the total impact? When you zoom out and look at the whole picture, what is the real long-term legacy of this era? 45 years. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's more than 2 full generations. The incredible length of this period of tension meant its influence wasn't just temporary, it was foundational. It literally embedded itself into the country's political DNA.
And really, that's the bottom line here. The Cold War is what cemented America's place as a global superpower. But it definitely came at a cost. It forced so many difficult choices between ambitions on the world stage and the needs of people at home. It left behind a legacy of intervention abroad, and at times, really deep, painful division at home.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. From the alliances that still exist, to ongoing conflicts like the one in Korea, to our own debates today about foreign policy and what our national priorities should be. Where do you see the echoes of this 45-year struggle shaping the world around us right now?